Welcome everyone, Simon here from the Whales of Wall Street. An IOTA video for you guys today. IOTA on the exchange, nice and easy that one. This is a project I've held for a number of years. It's arguably, technologically, my favorite in my portfolio. The price points we'll go on to in a moment, and the market in general in a moment. And I want to pinpoint some really key points of interest around the IOTA token in general for the years to come, because this is another one of those projects, and I did one 4 or 5 months ago on IOTA mentioning why people were getting so frustrated about the price not moving, everything else was moving, why wasn't IOTA. And there's a number of projects out there that you can essentially have as a long-term project or holding, but secondary to that, it does really heavily rely on other variables around the world. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, particularly around the EBSI involvement, the European blockchain institution that they're working on a project with for the frameworks of the European Union under the European Commission as well. And we'll talk a bit more about statistical data in regards to the application of the token relating to transactions per second and what those actions can look like. We've given a load of examples in the past, but let's focus on some really specific areas of what could really push IOTA in these coming years. So before we go into that, don't forget to, of course, smash that subscribe button if you have not done so already. And let's go straight into this topic, guys. So IOTA, if you don't know who IOTA are or what they do, go and check out our introductory videos that we did a while back. I'll try and leave a link to those at the end of this one. But generally speaking, for people that are new to IOTA, get my words out in a minute, we will have a quick sort of roundup, just talking really about some of the key factors. So a big element of IOTA is the feeless aspect of it. Now, it's not entirely completely zero feeless. What we're talking about here is how much it will cost for a transaction to occur and be validated, processed, etc. via the usage of blockchain protocol. The number is ridiculous. It's like 0. However many zeros and a 1 at the end. So in general, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than what is being used currently for that processing ability worldwide. And we'll talk about that again in a minute, because it really does nail home how important this kind of project and company is moving forward in the blockchain space, but also the integration potentially of AI as well. You've got a few other things here. And in fact, this website, on IOTA's platform, does tie in, the EBSI aspect of it, but also, why IOTA and EBSI are working together. So this is actually going to repeat some of the things I was going to mention anyway, so I might as well show it on the screen at the same time. In relation to some of those really key strategic areas and abilities of IOTA. So for me, the scalable aspect is absolutely gigantic, feeless, sustainable. Now, anything is pretty much more sustainable, arguably, compared to sort of Bitcoin mining and things like that. We know that. It's a boring topic, and everyone tries to compare it, and I'm not going to do that. It's a completely different thing and a completely different reasoning. However, the sustainable narrative is, of course, a very strong topic across the world regarding climate change, whatever you want to call it, and the sustainable factor of what's the energy requirement, what's the environmental impact, etc., etc. And the ability of the open source is really important from the application of developers and source coders, etc., especially when you're dealing with an entire framework of a humongous region, i.e. the European Union in this instance. So IOTA takes those boxes, and a bit of history but further behind this project, which we've done multiple videos of over the last 2 or 3 years. Phasing 1 into phase 2A, which is where they condensed the 35 applicants down to a very small selection of projects and companies that were being utilized for the framework efforts for blockchain in the European Union. And now IOTA is very much a hand-picked project and technology partner to essentially construct this framework and this regulation. There's going to be loads of different cases, loads of different application to all of this. So I just want to keep in mind, guys, digital product passports, property risk management, rights management, they're just like two small cases. We've got to think about things like EV cars, transactions financially in general. And just to reiterate, people are probably bored of me talking about this already in previous videos, but for those that are new, the benefit of this topic is the aspect of transactions per second. This isn't just finance abilities. This is anything and everything that is essentially connected to the internet or has an ability to do an action and then a transfer of that action. So that's where the transaction word comes from. And I've always used multiple examples of things like drones harvesting seeding based on algorithmic data from AI and supply and demand, logistics, transportation, everything all being simultaneous, and all these little pinpoints of time throughout that process from the end user all the way back to the manufacturing point. Think of all the things that go on in between there, the movement of things, services, products, etc. Every single move, every single change of a script is a transaction. This is why blockchain is so important, and the principles of blockchain are so important in general to speed up that process, along with quantum computing and AI from a predictive perspective and potentially trend perspective opportunities, to be able to coordinate that a lot faster and process it in a more valid way, a more confirmed way, and having that historic data. So it was almost nigh on impossible to hack or change the data unless previous billions upon billions of blocks are changed, right? You needed a lot of power to be able to do that. So that's why it's such a secure mechanism, blockchain in general. So this is why, or one of the main reasons why, the European Union Commission, along with EBSI, have selected IOTA moving forward. So when we're talking about that principal aspect of why is the price not moving, why is this, why is that? Well, there's a couple of variables here. Of course, the meme coins, the NFTs have had their time over the last few years, ISO narratives, DPIN narratives, and the general spectrum of this is there is no right and wrong in that sense of how you invest, because you have your own strategic opportunity, your own minds to do what you want to do. I personally haven't got involved in meme coins. I'm more interested in these kind of projects and companies that I will hold, most of them long term, as in I'm talking about 10, 20, 30 years. I personally don't want to be working after the age of 50. Not too far, it's quite far away, but it's not too far away for me to try and obtain that. It's a target, it's a goal. It doesn't mean it's definitely going to be achieved. So when we look at most of these companies, we look at the bubble, for example, at the beginning of the 90s. I was too young for that, but I knew what it was growing up. And of course, you're growing up with computers and things, you understand what Microsoft, Apple, etc. are as time went by. That bubble effect was massive. And it's no different to now, where you've now got a humongous market of 2.4 billion cryptos. And you condense that down, actually, that there's a very much a lot smaller number than that number that are really have the ability, for a better word, have the ability to coordinate itself in the real world, a real world utility. So these companies are kind of cherry picking. I can't get all of them. I don't have that much money. But, again, the right and wrongs of this is you do your research the best you can, and you pick the things that you think will have longevity. And of course, I do have crypto assets, like I've mentioned, many on the channel or many in my portfolio, which I'll do a video on my updated portfolio analysis in the coming days. I do have crypto that I will be looking for the trading aspect, in short term and sort of mid-term strategies as well. But there are just some here that I'm not fussed about the price right now, unless it goes parabolic and I need to take some action before I waste the money. But some of these, as I said in the previous video, are things that I would ascertain towards a pension or an alternative to a pension. So these kind of areas are really interesting to me. So I have a career in AI, IoT, blockchain, of course. And IoT is very interesting. So this is the Internet of Things. And this relates heavily to this transaction per second topic. This is one of the key things I'm going to talk about, because IOTA has an ability to really coordinate all of this, to power all of this, and from the aspect of its tangle mechanism, which is basically the technology that it uses, is like DAG, direct acyclic graph, which is an advancement of blockchain in my opinion, or the next phase of it, to be able to handle all of this. So just figuratively speaking, guys, as of this year, there are around 20 billion IoT devices, and they could be anything from like washing machines, smart cameras, smart bulbs, your laptop, whatever, anything pretty much connected to the internet and working simultaneously. We didn't mention earlier about supply and demand. Imagine you're buying something on Amazon or wherever it might be. Think of that process, all those different transactions to pinpoint, right, this has been purchased, needs to be delivered, it needs to be ordered again, trend of forecasting of how many products we need in the future, this and that. We'll come back to that point in a minute. But there's a multitude of that. That's just products and services. You've got things like the automation service. You've got abilities very soon of real world autonomous driving systems. That needs to be coordinated in an aspect of if you're going through tolls or you're paying for things or biometric payments. They are all aspects of TPS, transactions per second. You've got things like smart cities, the traffic aspects, anything and everything you can possibly think of that is connected to the internet. Now, by 2030, that 20 billion will probably be more likely to be around or in excess of 50 billion. Now, that is absolutely gigantic growth. We also have to anticipate the aspect of 5G progression, 6G, 7G. So the ability of interconnectivity, or from a connectivity perspective, that ability becomes very open to the whole world. There's a multitude of countries right now where things like Starlink have come across recently, newer network infrastructures. They've opened up new markets. They've opened up new borders. They've opened up new countries to include themselves within the real world of what everything else that we're doing, which is quite amazing, really. So you've got kind of two areas, really. You've got the computing power of all of this. How is this going to be recognized and computed, etc. And then you've got the aspect of how these IoT devices coming together, which is where IOTA comes in. So we can have the principle as a minimum, really, that most devices, whether it's sensors, cameras, whatever it is, has, let's say, one transaction per minute. Okay, so we can do the math on that. Of course, 50 billion transactions, if you insinuate that they've got one transaction per second. I think Bitcoin is roughly 7 to 10 transactions per second. We know Ethereum does up to 100 or so, maybe a bit more these days with the new advancements. Now, Visa at the moment, this is just for payments, is around about 25,000 transactions per second in real big times of need. So when we're talking about blockchain in this sphere of IOTA, when we're talking about hundreds of thousands being able to work per second, that's when it starts making sense, right? So when you go back to that point about IoT devices, this is just one simple area that we're talking about here. There's so many others, but this is a huge one, 50 billion devices, right? One transaction every minute, potentially. Some of those will have a lot more. So that's just a very conservative figure to be able to operate all of that. And I think that's where the tangle mechanism of IOTA really kicks in. The scalability aspect of that, so allowing those transactions numbers to increase if needed, and the ability for the blockchain to open up to the more and more devices in the future. It's like when you build a motorway, right? Here in the UK, they didn't have the brain power in the 1970s to think about population increases over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And then, hey presto, the M25 here in the UK, you probably hear about it all over the world. It's very famous for its nonsense traffic, is now at breaking point, is in peak times particularly, obviously. So scalability would allow, say, more lanes to come in, more ability for more cars, more things to happen, and therefore the economy speeds up because people can get places quicker and get jobs done quicker, etc., etc. Think of that process, that principle in other areas. So you've got all of those aspects there to link together. Now, these 50 billion transactions, we talk about 20 billion now, 50 billion in a few years' time. That's a big percentage increase in a short period of time. The infrastructure is getting better with energy consumption, the infrastructures of how these things work, our Wi-Fi capabilities, our connection capabilities, but the processing aspect is arguably slowing down a bit. We try to use cloud as much as possible. You can see clearly that we have, if you go on like down down detector, for example, you see how many companies go down for long periods of time throughout every day now because they just can't handle the magnitude, or their infrastructure falls apart, or something goes wrong. And that, by the way, can be handled things in the near future, things like AI, machine learning, deep learning, where it'll find a problem and it will fix it, or it'll divert somewhere else while it fixes that, allowing service to continue and back around again. But the AI factor of blockchain is very important to consider, because you can, whilst you have scalability in blockchain, you can also reduce the scaling if possible with AI algorithmic data. We go back to the point earlier about supply demand, trend setting, forecasting, that kind of feeling of guesswork that could be done, and take that power away from computing needs as well. So this is happening now. If you imagine in 5 years' time when we get to 2030, and bear in mind all the the goals of 2030, Agenda 30 was signed by 150, 160 countries in 2016, 2015, or whenever it was. Big thing about digital currency, sustainability, all these things. Obviously, there'll be more in the future. And we're coming off the back as well, COP29. I think we're talking about $1.3 trillion just in the climate, environmental investments alone. Even wind farms transacting energy or carbon credits, through the energy peer-to-peer sector. That's all transactions per second. You can evaluate in your head how big this is. So I'm not fussed about the price point of IOTA right now, because I know in the future it's going to be pretty awesome. Predicting wise, I'm not a huge fan of price predictions, as you know. But we do have to be realistic in our minds that we've seen, previous all-time highs in these instances, and we have played ourselves forwards in the past to things like $2.20 is a high, or $2.35 back in 2021. Back in the 27-18 markers, it went up to sort of towards $3 to $5. Now it's got to take a long way up. We'll go into the chart shortly in a minute's time anyway to do a bit more deep analysis on that. But my point being is that you could argue that we're never going to previous highs or all-time highs. Well, actually, that is still definitely possible. Look at how Solana works, where it was suppressed for so long. Then the network opened. People started building on it. People started transferring their projects onto it. Then people, investor-wise, jumped into it, and the price shot up. There's no difference really to the next 2 to 5 years in general. I'm not even talking now about 10, 15, 20 years time where I'm interested in. It's all about very soon, when we talk about the real world utility and the abilities, projects like IOTA, when that gets fully switched on, guys, and things start getting connected more and more, it is going to be phenomenal. Think about the EV car market, eSIMs and things like this. You've got, as I said, the autonomous vehicles. These numbers are coming thick and fast. Our previous cars are being replaced with EV. EV doesn't just mean electric cars. It also has like intellectual information in there. Biometrics will be involved. There's so many things. I could go on for this all day. But my point being is that, try not to worry too much about the cost. If you're that bothered, absolutely go for other assets in the market. And I guarantee to you, majority will come back to companies and projects like this in the future. They'll make money elsewhere. I still do that. In my principles, a lot of the sort of assets that I hold elsewhere, what I'll eventually sell off, they will go into companies like IOTA, like Ripple, etc., moving forwards, because I think they will have much more residual value, a much more stabilized, higher price point in the future. If you think like Nvidia and all these big companies out there at the moment, they started somewhere. If you look at the prices of a lot of these projects or companies in the 90s and in the noughties, you will see that they were respectable prices. It's only now we look at them and go, oh my God, the value of them. People put money into them because they're high value, but they're also sustainable. They don't fluctuate too much. That's why pension funds are after them. That's why ETFs are after them. And that's why we're seeing it now in the crypto space. When something has a lot more stability, they tend to become ETFs, because then pension funds and investment companies, insurance companies start buying them up in pockets of value, holding their assets in these as well. So that's where I'm clear on IOTA, personally. Let's jump into the chart. Hopefully you found those bits interesting. So we've already been through the history of IOTA's price briefly, but let's talk about the here and now. So where are we? By the way, this is from a previous video. That's where I think we could get into the next bull run. Hopefully. All depends, as I said, obviously the market in general, how much more influx of people are coming in this time around in this market compared to 2021 and 17, 18 respectively, but also the utility of it as well. It may still not be ready. So it might be something we look at properly in those higher regions when it's 2028 or 2030, who knows? But we've got to prepare either way for any of those kind of opportunities that arise, maybe potential profit taking, because at the end of the day, this video is not just about the long-term aspects. Yes, of course, if things do happen in our favor, I will of course be taking profits at certain areas of interest as well. So the fib levels are showcasing something very interesting. You can see if we break this down, I haven't moved this probably for a few months now. You can see the target areas are quite interesting. They're hitting these boundaries quite nicely and then withstanding themselves. In fact, we could actually look at this one also. I'm just going to stretch this across. Apologies that it shows two at the same time, but it definitely gives you proper validation of two areas. So you've got a mid-range here and a slightly longer term one as well. So the next step up for IOTA is around about 27, 28 cents. At the moment, it's failing, but you know the most of the market has been doing that in the last 24, 48 hours anyway. So we hit this marker around 24 cents. We've had a retracement back down to around this 22-cent mark, and now it's floating roughly just in between that. Ideally, in my opinion, we want to see that for a couple more days, and leading into December, assuming the trend does what it did last time round in the bigger markets, will start seeing that going upwards. What we don't want to do is see a gigantic acceleration upwards, because that's when it starts getting very emotive. It's great for people who hold it and then people FOMO in. It's not so good for the people that are jumping into these higher regions thinking it's just going to keep going up, when actually it needs to correct itself for us to then stabilize and then go up on the next trajectory up. So what we do, if we go back a couple of days, you can see on the bottom left here, the RSI. So over the last few weeks, actually, it's been quite respectable. It's still in the higher remit. So in my opinion, there is still movement upwards to go. Equally, if this was more towards, say, 55, 50, I was sitting there umming and ahhing going, well, I might put a bit in as a DCA because it could go either way. In some instances, you have these like really low. I tend to buy definitively, this is just personally, when we sort of hit the sort of 45 or below RSI levels, because you have that kind of approach that we're in a downward spiral, and there's more leg up than there is leg down, right? And it's the same principle on the way up. You get to that point of around 70, you sort of going, it's getting a bit touch and go here. I'm not going to be investing or putting extra capital in. We're going to sit tight and see what happens. So from a short-term trading perspective, there are definitely elements in here, depending on how much you put in, of course, to take advantage of these small drops in and out over these short periods of time. The longevity of this is actually, for me personally, I'll mention this because I'd like to try and be honest. I think I'm about 40 odd % down on my IOTA holding. So it's in my interest to be a long term anyway, to try and get back to break even at a bare minimum. On that instance, I have been buying or trying to claw back as much as possible by buying IOTA at these sort of 14, 15 cent marks, but it's still way off. Well, not too far off, but we are relatively way off. I think my average buy price, I think, was like 38 cents or something. So it's not terrible, but when you put it in the figure of 43% down, it's not so great. However, saying that, if we're going from current positions to where we think they're all-time highs, I'll probably forget that conversation altogether, because I think that's a good 2,000 odd % up from where it is currently. Don't know how many X's that is from now, but you get the drift. So that's my honesty around it. In terms of my holdings at the moment as of recording, but yeah, in general, if we're to get towards that sort of 60, 70, probably for me personally 70 cents to $1, I would start potentially taking some of my original investment out just to clear some of it out and then see where we go with it. But in general, as I said, I'm more of a long-term holder of this, so I would ideally want to see at least the $2 mark before I did something. For those that have come into IOTA a bit later, or are still in a position where maybe I am, maybe bought even higher average prices, you know, it's really just a question of, like, you might have had enough, you might want to move it to other projects, you might want to do the chasing game of finding something that's low at the moment and about to speed up. Well, we wait for IOTA to wake up in the near future and get that at a price before that flies up. There's so many different things to consider here. But one of the things for sure is IOTA is slowly waking up, for sure. performance indicator on the right hand side here showing a good progress on the week. It's showing good progress in the month. Very good month, actually, to be fair. And the year is slightly dragging back still in terms of that year-to-year point. Year-to-date, minus 23. So if we can have a really good December, I think I might be able to break even at least. Who knows? But I think it's definitely possible in these coming weeks. But other things, variable-wise, of course, the marketing of IOTA. We talked about the real-world utility, the timing of that. We talked about areas of interest around other variables in the market, of course, as well. The whole market in general needs to have that buzz, especially into the what we perceive as the altcoins for the terminologies. All these things need to align. So that's why I don't go too deep into price predictions and things, because I could pick a number out of my head. I've anticipated this one purely based on those things. That's all it is. On previous market data and history, movements, but also everything that we know that is coming in the future in the world. So guys, that's a bit of a wrap up of IOTA. I hope you found that interesting. Let me know if you need any more detail on IOTA. But thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out the intro videos of IOTA as well if you're new. But this is for sure still my favorite project that I hold from the technological perspective. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.